3 executives, 1 billionaire, and a lie so perfect it could destroy them all. The moment I pretended to go deaf, I stopped being their boss and became their trap. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. Calvin Robertson was everything I thought I needed in a CFO. When he walked into my office 5 years ago with his Harvard MBA, his Goldman Sachs pedigree, and his connections to every major institutional investor on Wall Street, I thought I'd found the missing piece. The numbers genius who could take Crowley Dynamics from scrappy success story to industry titan. The kind of executive who opens doors I didn't even know existed. "You've built something remarkable here, Marvin," he'd said during that first interview, leaning forward with a kind of focused intensity that reads as genuine passion. His suit was expensive but not flashy. Navy Tom Ford, subtle enough to suggest confidence rather than desperation. But you're leaving money on the table. Significant money. With the right financial architecture, the right strategic partnerships, the right positioning with institutional investors, we could triple your valuation in 18 months. He wasn't exaggerating. We did exactly that. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known because I was too busy scaling operations, chasing contracts, building the infrastructure that would support our explosive growth, was that Calvin had been planning his exit strategy from day one. Not his exit from the company. His exit from working for someone else. The morning I lost my hearing started like any other Tuesday. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Crowley Dynamics headquarters in Midtown. I was announcing a major partnership with a European logistics firm, the kind of deal that would cement our position as a global player. Calvin had structured the financial terms. Sierra had negotiated the operational framework. Even Stockton had coordinated the facility preparations for the international expansion. It was supposed to be a celebration. I arrived at the office at 7:30, 3 hours early, and went through my normal routine. Emails. Market reports. A brief check-in with department heads. Everything normal. Everything routine. Everything designed to make what happened next look completely spontaneous. At 9:45, I met with Marcus in a secure room 3 floors below street level. One of the few spaces in the building that isn't wired into our security system. He handed me a small black case. "Custom built," he said, opening it to reveal what looked like expensive hearing aids. Military-grade recording equipment disguised as medical devices. Everything they say within 20 feet gets transmitted to an encrypted cloud server. Battery life. 48 hours continuous. They're completely undetectable unless someone physically examines them with specialized equipment. I picked one up, turning it over in my hand. It was surprisingly light. Unremarkable. Perfect. "And you're absolutely certain," I said slowly, "that Robertson, Sierra, and Stockton are planning to move against me?" Marcus pulled up his tablet, showing me a transcript of a phone call from 3 days ago. Robertson's voice clear as day. "The board's ready. We just need the right moment. Something public. Something that makes it impossible for them to keep him in charge." Sierra's response. "The press conference could work. High visibility. If he shows any sign of weakness." Robertson again. "Not weakness. Incapacity. We need medical incapacity. That's the only way the lawyers say we can invoke the emergency succession clause." I'd read the transcript a dozen times already. Each time, it felt like a knife turning in my chest. These were people I'd trusted. People I'd made wealthy. Calvin's stock options alone were worth $8 million. Sierra had gone from a mid-level operations manager at a failing company to the COO of a billion-dollar firm. And Stockton, I'd kept him on when every efficiency consultant said his position was redundant, because loyalty mattered to me. Apparently, it didn't matter to them. "The moment you collapse," Marcus said, bringing me back to the present, "they're going to start talking. They'll think they're safe. They'll think you can't hear the things they say when they think you're not listening." I fitted the hearing aids into my ears. They felt strange. Foreign. Like wearing a costume. "That's exactly what I'm counting on," I said. The press conference started at 10:02 a.m. The conference room was packed. Journalists, investors, company employees, executives from our new European partners. Camera flashes. The low murmur of professional anticipation. I could see Calvin and Sierra in the front row, both of them perfectly composed, perfectly professional. Stockton stood near the back by the AV equipment, his usual position during company events. I stepped up to the podium and began my prepared remarks. For 8 minutes, everything went according to script. I talked about innovation, about global expansion, about the future of logistics technology. I made jokes that landed. I delivered sound bites designed for the evening news. I was Marvin Crowley, confident CEO, master of his domain. And then, mid-sentence, I stopped. I blinked, touched my ear, frowned. The room went silent, waiting. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice uncertain in a way I'd practiced 100 times in front of my bathroom mirror. I'm having trouble." I touched my ear again, looked around the room with an expression of growing confusion and panic. I can't hear." What happened next, I didn't have to fake. The genuine concern on people's faces. The sudden movement as people rushed toward the stage. The flashing of camera phones capturing what would become the image of the day. Billionaire CEO Marvin Crowley, collapsing at his own press conference. I let myself fall. Controlled. Careful. But convincing enough that the gasps were real. The last thing I saw before I closed my eyes was Calvin Robertson's face. He wasn't concerned. He was calculating. And in that moment, I knew we'd made the right call. I woke up in a private room at Mount Sinai, surrounded by doctors I didn't know and a few concerned employees I did. Marcus was there, playing the role of worried security chief. My assistant Jennifer, one of the 3 people in on the plan, stood by the door, keeping unnecessary visitors out. The doctor, a neurologist named Dr. Sarah Chen, whom Marcus had briefed in advance, was explaining my condition to the small crowd. "Mr. Crowley has experienced what we're calling a stress-induced auditory collapse," she said with perfect clinical authority. "It's rare, but documented in cases of extreme psychological pressure. The good news is that there's no structural damage. The challenging news is that we can't predict if or when his hearing will return." I lay in the hospital bed, eyes open but unfocused, playing the part of a man whose world had just gone silent. In reality, through the hearing aids Dr. Chen had just fitted me with, the ones Marcus had provided, I could hear every word perfectly. Can he understand us? That was Sierra, her voice pitched with what sounded like genuine concern. She was standing close to the bed, her hand on the rail. "He can read lips to some extent," Dr. Chen said, "and we'll be providing him with assisted communication devices. But for now, he needs rest." "Of course," Calvin said, and I could hear him stepping closer. "Whatever he needs. The company will cover all medical expenses, naturally, and we'll make sure everything runs smoothly while he recovers." I bet you will, I thought, keeping my expression neutral. They stayed for another 20 minutes, making concerned noises, asking medical questions, presenting the perfect image of loyal executives worried about their leader. But as they were leaving, as they thought I couldn't possibly hear them, I caught the end of a whispered conversation between Calvin and Sierra in the hallway. "Couldn't have planned it better if we tried. How long do you think?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Then we move." The door closed behind them. I opened my eyes fully and looked at Marcus, who'd heard the same exchange through the surveillance feed. 2 weeks, I said quietly, speaking normally now that we were alone with Dr. Chen and Jennifer. "They're giving themselves 2 weeks before they make their move." "Then we have 2 weeks to get everything we need," Marcus replied. I removed the hearing aids, my props for the performance, and set them on the bedside table. Tomorrow, I'd put them back in. Tomorrow, I'd return to the office and play the role of the deaf CEO, vulnerable and diminished. But tonight, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "When people think you can't hear them," I said softly, "they finally tell you who they really are." The day after the collapse, I returned to Crowley Dynamics headquarters. The building felt different somehow. Or maybe I felt different moving through it. I arrived early, 6:30 a.m., because I wanted to see the space before people filled it with their performances of concern. Jennifer met me in the lobby with a tablet and a carefully neutral expression. She'd been my executive assistant for 3 years, and in that time, she'd proven herself to be not just competent but genuinely loyal. When Marcus had come to me with evidence of the conspiracy, Jennifer was the second person I told. She'd looked at the transcripts, listened to the recordings, and said simply, "What do you need me to do?" Now, she handed me the tablet, which displayed a messaging interface. Our agreed-upon communication method. "Good morning," I typed. "Status report." She glanced at the screen and typed back. *Robertson arrived at 6 a.m. He's in your office. Sierra is in the conference room with legal. Stockton is in the basement, checking equipment. Of course Calvin was in my office, probably sitting in my chair, getting comfortable. I made my way to the elevator, moving with the careful deliberation of someone adjusting to a new disability. In reality, I was listening. The building's ambient sounds, conversations, footsteps, the hum of HVAC systems, all fed through the surveillance network Marcus had quietly expanded over the past 2 weeks. When I reached my floor, Calvin was indeed in my office. He stood up quickly when he saw me, his expression shifting to concern so smoothly it would have been impressive if I didn't know it was fake. His lips moved. "Marvin, good to see you. How are you feeling?" I watched his mouth carefully as if reading lips, then typed on the tablet Jennifer held. "Better. Want to work." Calvin nodded, his relief almost palpable. "Of course. But we need to discuss some practical arrangements. Just temporary, you understand. Until you're fully recovered." I gestured for him to continue, my expression open and trusting. "The board met yesterday," he said, speaking slowly and clearly, as if volume would somehow help me understand. "We all agreed that you should take as much time as you need. No pressure. But in the interim, we need someone to handle the day-to-day operations, the investor relations, the strategic decisions." He paused, watching my face for a reaction. "We thought, and this is just temporary, Marvin, that I could step in as acting CEO. Sierra would take over my CFO responsibilities. We'd keep you fully informed of all major decisions, of course, but it would give you time to focus on recovery without worrying about the company." I let the silence stretch for a moment, as if processing this information slowly. Then I nodded and typed. Makes sense. Trust you. The relief on Calvin's face was genuine this time. "Thank you, Marvin. I know this isn't easy, but we're going to take care of everything. You built something incredible here, and we're going to protect it." "I know you will," I typed. He smiled. Warm, reassuring. The smile of a trusted friend. The smile of a man who thought he'd just won. After he left, I sat alone in my office. My office, no matter what titles they gave themselves, and activated the monitoring system. Through the network of microphones Marcus had installed, I could hear Calvin in the hallway, his voice no longer slow and clear. "He's completely out of it," Calvin said, probably to Sierra. "This is going to be easier than we thought." Sierra's voice. "You're sure he can't hear anything? Did you see him? He's reading lips, typing on a tablet like a child. The doctor said it's complete auditory loss. He's not coming back from this." "What about the board?" "They're already on our side. They've seen the medical reports. Another few weeks of this, and they'll approve the permanent transition. Then we restructure, take the company public, and—" Their voices faded as they moved down the hallway. I sat back in my chair, removed my hearing aids, and allowed myself a moment of pure, focused anger. 2 weeks, they'd said. I'd give them 3. Let them get comfortable. Let them think they'd won. Let them make mistakes. Because every word they spoke, every plan they made, every moment they thought I couldn't hear them, I was recording all of it. I typed a message to Marcus. Day 1 complete. They're moving faster than expected. Increase monitoring on all 3 targets. His response came immediately. Already done. Conference room is wired. Their office phones are tapped. We're even monitoring their personal devices when they're on company Wi-Fi. Asterisk. Good, I typed. Asterisk, now we wait. And we listen. Asterisk. I put the hearing aids back in and returned to my performance of the diminished CEO. But inside, I was sharper than I'd ever been. I didn't lose my hearing that day. I just stopped pretending to listen. And in the silence that followed, I heard everything I needed to destroy them. 3 weeks earlier, Kendra Edwards was scrubbing office floors at 2 a.m., her hands raw from industrial cleaning chemicals, while her daughter slept on a makeshift bed in the supply closet. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when Marcus proposed 14 years ago. Back then, she'd been a nursing student with dreams of working in pediatric care, of making a difference in children's lives. Marcus had been a construction foreman with steady work and a steadier heart, the kind of man who remembered anniversaries and called during his lunch break just to hear her voice. They'd had plans. A house with a backyard. 2 kids, maybe 3. Sunday dinners with extended family. The kind of ordinary, beautiful life that people build slowly, carefully, together. Then the scaffolding collapsed. Kendra paused her scrubbing, sitting back on her heels in the empty executive corridor of Crowley Dynamics' 47th floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered like a promise she could see but never touch. Somewhere in those buildings, people were sleeping in beds that cost more than her annual salary. Living lives where a medical emergency didn't mean choosing between medication and rent. She pulled off her rubber gloves and flexed her aching fingers. The arthritis was getting worse, another problem she couldn't afford to address. The free clinic had given her ibuprofen and advice to reduce repetitive stress. She'd almost laughed. Reduce stress. Sure. Right after she paid for Pamela's asthma medication, the overdue electricity bill, and the school fees that kept mounting despite her daughter's scholarship. From the supply closet down the hall, she heard Pamela shift in her sleep. 8 years old and already too familiar with industrial cleaning supply closets. Too practiced at making herself small and quiet while her mother worked. Kendra stood, her knees protesting, and returned to scrubbing. The Crowley Dynamics Tower was her 3rd job of the night. She started at 6 p.m. cleaning a medical office building in Midtown, moved to a law firm in the financial district at 10 p.m., and finished here at midnight, working until dawn. She slept from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m., woke up to get Pamela from school, helped with homework, made dinner, got her daughter settled with books and old coloring supplies, then started the whole cycle again. 6 days a week. 52 weeks a year. Because that's what you did when your husband died without life insurance, when the construction company claimed the accident was employee negligence, when the medical bills from his 3 days in the ICU consumed every dollar of your savings and then some. You survived. Mama. Kendra looked up to see Pamela standing in the corridor, wrapped in the thin blanket Kendra kept in her cleaning cart. Her daughter's dark hair was tangled from sleep, her brown eyes still heavy-lidded. Hey, baby girl. Bad dream. Pamela shook her head. Just woke up. Can I help? It's 2:30 in the morning. You should be sleeping. So should you. Kendra smiled despite her exhaustion. That was pure Pamela. 8 years old and already carrying the weight of their situation with a grace that broke her mother's heart. She never complained about the supply closet beds, the second-hand clothes, the birthday parties she couldn't attend because they cost money for gifts. Come here, Kendra said, opening her arms. Pamela crossed the hallway and buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Even through the exhaustion, Kendra felt that familiar surge of fierce love, the kind that made every raw-knuckled hour worth it. Tell me something good, Pamela said, their nightly ritual. Something good, Kendra repeated, thinking. Your teacher called yesterday. Said your essay about courage was the best in the class. Really? Really? She said you have a gift for words, for seeing the good in people. Pamela pulled back slightly, her expression serious. Is that the kind of gift that can help us? The question cut deep. Because no, words wouldn't pay their rent. Essays wouldn't buy asthma medication. But Kendra had promised herself that Pamela would grow up with something more valuable than money. Dignity, kindness, the unshakable knowledge that poverty didn't define worth. The most important kind of gift, Kendra said firmly. Money comes and goes, baby girl. But the person you are, that's forever. They worked together in comfortable silence for the next hour. Pamela emptied small trash bins while Kendra finished the floors. It wasn't legal, having her daughter here, but the night supervisor had lost his own wife to cancer 2 years ago and understood desperation. He looked the other way as long as Pamela stayed quiet and invisible. Always invisible. That was the unspoken rule of their life. Don't draw attention. Don't make trouble. Don't let anyone notice the 8-year-old sleeping in supply closets or the mother working 3 jobs. Because the moment someone noticed was the moment social services might notice. The moment someone might decide Kendra couldn't provide adequate care. The moment they might take Pamela away. So they stayed invisible. "Mama," Pamela said quietly, dumping paper into the recycling. "Mrs. Chen from 4B asked me to visit her yesterday." Kendra looked up sharply. Why? Her arthritis was bad. She couldn't open her medicine bottle. Pamela's voice went smaller. "I helped her. And then she said her hands felt better. That the pain went away. This again. It had started 6 months ago. Mrs. Rodriguez in their building, complaining of chronic migraines, had asked Pamela to bring her something from the kitchen. When Pamela handed her a glass of water, her small hand brushing Mrs. Rodriguez's temple, the woman had gasped. "The pain," she'd said, wonder in her voice. "It's gone." Then Mr. Washington's diabetic neuropathy. Then little Jamal's persistent earache. Then 3 more neighbors, all reporting the same strange phenomenon. When Pamela touched them, even briefly, their pain diminished or disappeared entirely. Kendra had tried to dismiss it as coincidence. Placebo effect. Wishful thinking from desperate people. But she'd seen it herself 2 weeks ago when she'd badly burned her hand on a hot pan. Pamela had grabbed her wrist, tears streaming down her face, and the searing pain had simply stopped. The burn still blistered, still required treatment, but the agony had vanished under her daughter's touch. "What did you tell Mrs. Chen?" Kendra asked carefully. "That I didn't know why it happened. That it doesn't always work." Pamela twisted the edge of her blanket nervously. "Was that okay?" I didn't know what else to say. Kendra set down her mop and knelt in front of her daughter, gripping her small shoulders. "Listen to me. This gift you have, whatever it is, it's special. But it's also private. You understand. We can't let people know about it." "Why not?" "Because people would want to study you," Kendra thought. "Or exploit you. Or take you away from me to better understand your abilities. Because the world isn't kind to people who are different, especially poor people who are different. Because some gifts are meant to be quiet," she said instead. "Like acts of kindness. You don't announce them. You just do them when you can for people you trust." Pamela nodded slowly. "Like you. Working all night so we can stay together." Kendra's throat tightened. Exactly like that. By 5 a.m., they'd finished the entire executive floor. Kendra locked the supply closet, packed their few belongings into her cart, and guided Pamela toward the service elevator. As they passed the main conference room, she paused. Through the glass walls, she could see the space where, in a few weeks, important people would gather for some kind of press event. She'd seen the catering orders, the AV equipment requisitions. Whatever was happening here mattered to people who lived in that glittering world outside the windows. And she would be invisible in the background, emptying their trash, cleaning their spills, maintaining their world while remaining unseen. "Mama." Pamela's voice pulled her back. "Are you okay?" Kendra looked down at her daughter. This bright, kind, impossibly special child who deserved so much more than supply closet beds and second-hand everything. "I'm okay, baby girl. Come on. Let's go home." As they rode the service elevator down to the loading dock, Kendra made herself a promise. Whatever it took, however many floors she had to scrub, she would give Pamela a chance at something better. Education. Opportunities. A life where her gifts, all of them, could flourish. She would survive. They both would. Because that's what love demanded. 3 weeks later, Kendra would be cleaning that same conference room when a billionaire collapsed on stage, when chaos erupted, when her daughter's gentle touch would intersect with power in ways neither of them could have predicted. But on this quiet morning, exhausted and anonymous, she simply held Pamela's hand as they emerged into the pre-dawn streets of Manhattan. Two invisible people in a city of millions. For now. The surveillance expansion took 3 days to complete. Marcus coordinated everything through a private security contractor he'd worked with during his FBI days. People who understood discretion and didn't ask questions when a billionaire wanted his own building wired for sound. They came in during the night shifts, dressed as HVAC technicians, and installed microphones so small they were virtually invisible. Coffee machine in the executive break room. Check. Air vents in the conference rooms. Check. Elevator panels on the executive floors. Check. Every space where people felt safe enough to speak freely was now transmitting directly to an encrypted server that only Marcus and I could access. "We're live," Marcus said, showing me the monitoring interface on his tablet. It displayed a grid of audio channels, each one labeled with a location. Waveforms pulsed gently as they picked up ambient sound, the hum of ventilation, distant footsteps, the quiet bass line of a building at rest. We were sitting in my penthouse, far from Crowley dynamics, far from the performance I had to maintain during business hours. Here I could speak normally. Here I could be myself. "How's the quality?" I asked. Marcus tapped one of the channels and a recording played. Two junior analysts talking about a client presentation, their voices clear and crisp despite being captured from a vent 15 feet above their heads. "Crystal clear," he said. "And it's all cloud-based, backed up in real time to 3 separate servers. Even if they somehow discovered the physical microphones, they'd never find the recordings." I nodded slowly, watching the waveforms pulse across the screen. Somewhere in this building, Calvin Robertson was probably planning his next move. Sierra Gunn was probably calculating timelines. And Stephen Stockton was probably wrestling with whatever remained of his conscience. And I would hear every word. "There's something else," Marcus said, his tone shifting. "I've been digging into Sierra's background. The acquisition angle you mentioned. I found it." He pulled up a file on his tablet. Business documents, news articles, bankruptcy filings. "Gunn Logistics," he said. Sierra's father, Richard Gunn, founded it in 1998. Mid-sized regional player, mostly East Coast operations. They were doing well until I bought them out, I finished quietly. "You bought their biggest client," Marcus corrected. "Thornton Manufacturing. It was your 3rd major acquisition about 8 years ago. Thornton had an exclusive contract with Gunn Logistics. When you acquired Thornton, you consolidated all their logistics under Crowley Dynamics. Standard business practice. And Gunn Logistics lost 60% of their revenue overnight. They tried to recover, but the market was already tight. They filed for bankruptcy 18 months later. Richard Gunn lost everything. His business, his reputation, his retirement savings. He died of a heart attack 6 months after the bankruptcy finalized. The words hit me like a physical blow. I remembered the Thornton acquisition. It had been a calculated move, a strategic expansion that made perfect sense on paper. I'd known there would be downstream effects, that some vendor relationships would be disrupted. But I hadn't thought about the human cost. Hadn't investigated which small companies might be destroyed in the wake of my growth. Sierra was 24 when her father died, Marcus continued. She'd just finished her MBA. Started working for a competitor of ours, then applied to Crowley Dynamics 3 years later. You hired her personally. She was brilliant, I said softly. Top of her class, incredible operational mind, came with glowing references. I never made the connection between her last name and Gunn Logistics. Never even thought to look. She made sure you wouldn't, Marcus said. She changed her name legally after her father's death. She was born Sierra Rodriguez, her mother's maiden name. She only took Gunn after the bankruptcy, like she was claiming it as armor. And then she came to work for you. I stared at the documents on the screen. Sierra's employee file. Her performance reviews. 5 years of excellence, of loyalty, of slowly rising through the ranks until she was close enough to strike. This wasn't just about money or power. This was personal. She's been planning this since the day she walked through our doors, I said. Looks that way, Marcus agreed. The question is whether Robertson knows about her motivation, or if he thinks this is purely a financial play. Does it matter? Might matter for how we handle the exposure. If Robertson is just greedy, that's one thing. If he's complicit in a revenge plot. Either way, they're conspiring to commit corporate fraud, I interrupted. Either way, they're going down. Marcus studied me for a long moment. You're taking this personally now. It was always personal, I said quietly. But now I understand why she hates me. And understanding doesn't change what I have to do. It just makes it harder. The board dinner was scheduled for Thursday evening at Per Se, one of those Manhattan restaurants where a reservation required connections and a meal cost more than most people's monthly rent. It was supposed to be a celebration. Our European partnership, our Q1 numbers, our continued dominance in the logistics sector. Instead, it became something else entirely. I arrived with Jennifer, who'd become my constant companion and translator since the collapse. She sat beside me, tablet ready, prepared to type any communication I needed to convey. In reality, she was there to maintain the illusion while I listened. Calvin and Sierra were already seated when we arrived, both of them perfectly composed in their expensive evening wear. Calvin stood to greet me, his handshake firm and warm, his lips moving in what I lip-read as, "So glad you could make it." I nodded and smiled, playing the part of the gracious diminished leader. Stockton arrived 15 minutes later, looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit. He'd always been more comfortable in work clothes, hands-on with building maintenance and facility operations. Putting him in formal wear was like putting armor on a pacifist. Technically functional but fundamentally wrong. He shook my hand briefly, his eyes not quite meeting mine, and took a seat across the table. The meal began with all the usual pleasantries. Wine was poured. Appetizers arrived. Conversation flowed around me in a pantomime I was supposed to be unable to hear. But through the modified hearing aids Marcus had given me, I heard everything. Impressive how well he's handling it, one of the board members said. Most people would have taken a leave of absence. Marvin's always been resilient, Calvin replied smoothly. Though we have to be realistic about the long-term implications. Running a billion-dollar company requires split-second decisions, constant communication, high-stakes negotiations. Are you suggesting he's not capable? Another board member asked. I'm suggesting we need contingency plans, Calvin said. For his sake as much as the company's. Sierra nodded, her voice warm with false concern. We all want what's best for Marvin. But we also have responsibilities to shareholders, employees, clients. If his condition is permanent. Has anyone discussed this with him directly? Someone asked. All eyes turned to me. I maintained my pleasant, slightly distant expression, as if I couldn't quite follow the nuances of the conversation. Jennifer leaned close, pretending to explain what was being said, and I nodded thoughtfully. He's very focused on recovery, Sierra said gently. I think discussing succession planning right now would be premature and potentially cruel. Murmurs of agreement around the table. I kept smiling. The real conversation happened after dinner, when several board members had left and only the core executive team remained. We'd moved to a private lounge area, ostensibly for a nightcap. In reality, Calvin and Sierra had orchestrated this moment precisely. He can't hear us, right? One of the remaining board members asked, glancing at me. I was sitting slightly apart from the group, seemingly absorbed in my phone, Jennifer beside me reviewing emails. Completely deaf, Calvin confirmed. The doctors say it's irreversible. Something about neural pathways and stress-induced damage. The technical details don't really matter. Bottom line is he's operating at maybe 30% capacity. That seems generous, Sierra said, and there was an edge to her voice now, the false warmth gone. He's essentially a figurehead at this point. We're making all the real decisions. Is that sustainable? The board member asked. Not long-term, Calvin said. Which is why we need to start thinking about formal transition of authority. Not hostile, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet shift that acknowledges reality. Stockton, who'd been silent most of the evening, finally spoke. Maybe we should wait. See if he improves. Wait for what? Sierra's voice was sharp now. For him to magically regain his hearing? For him to suddenly become the CEO he was 3 weeks ago? That's not happening, Stephen. You know it, we know it, the doctors know it. I just think. You think too much, Calvin interrupted, but his tone was light, almost joking. That's always been your problem. You're loyal to a fault. But loyalty to a person shouldn't override loyalty to the company. Loyalty to the company he built, Stockton said quietly. Loyalty to the company we're building now, Sierra corrected. Marvin did something incredible here. No one's denying that. But his time is over. And the sooner we all accept that, the smoother this transition will be. I watched them from across the room, my expression placid, my posture relaxed. Inside, I was cataloging every word, every inflection, every reveal of their true thoughts. What about the staff? The board member asked. The optics of pushing out a disabled CEO. We're not pushing anyone out, Calvin said smoothly. We're managing a medical crisis with compassion and pragmatism. Marvin will retain his title, his equity, his dignity. He just won't retain operational control. There's a difference. A legal difference, Sierra added. The company bylaws are very clear about incapacity clauses. We're not doing anything wrong. We're protecting shareholder value. The board member nodded slowly. When? 6 weeks, Calvin said. Maybe 8. Long enough for the medical situation to be clearly permanent. Short enough that we don't lose momentum. By summer, we'll have a new structure in place. They toasted to that, to their careful coup, to their calculated takeover, to the future they thought they were securing. And I sat 20 feet away, deaf to their words but hearing every syllable, watching their reflections in the lounge's dark windows. Stockton caught my eye for just a moment. There was something in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or doubt, but then he looked away and lifted his glass with the others. Sierra's laugh rang out, bright and sharp. To new beginnings, she said. To new beginnings, they echoed. I raised my own glass of water in a silent toast. To evidence, I thought. To recorded confessions. To the moment when new beginnings become new endings. I didn't go home after the dinner. Instead, I went back to my penthouse office and opened the monitoring software. Marcus had already flagged the evening's recordings, marking the most damning sections with red timestamps. I put on headphones and listened to the entire dinner again, this time watching the audio waveforms dance across the screen as their voices played. Each spike was a betrayal visualized. Each laugh a knife made visible. Sierra's voice, discussing her father's ruined company? I watched that waveform pulse with barely contained rage beneath the professional tone. Calvin's smooth assurances about managing me? The waveform showed his confidence, his certainty that he'd won. Stockton's weak protests? The waveform revealed his doubt, his wavering loyalty, his fear. I replayed Sierra's "His time is over" 3 times, watching the sharp peaks of her consonants, the sustained valleys of her vowels. There was satisfaction in that statement, something beyond simple business calculation. This was personal for her. And now it was personal for me. I opened a new file and began transcribing the evening's conversations, creating a document that would eventually form part of the evidence package. Time stamps. Speaker identification. Context notes. Every word they'd said, thinking I couldn't hear. Every plan they'd made, assuming I was powerless. Every betrayal they'd committed, believing themselves safe. The transcription took 2 hours. When I finished, the sky outside was beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray. I'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, but I didn't feel tired. I felt focused. I saved the file, backed it up to 3 separate servers, and encrypted it with a password only Marcus, Jennifer, and I knew. Then I stood at my window, looking out over the city, and spoke into the empty room. You're right, Sierra. Deaf men make perfect witnesses. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the penthouse, it carried clearly. Because everyone confesses to someone who can't hear them. I touched the hearing aids in my ears, these small devices that had become both my prison and my weapon. 6 weeks, you said. Maybe 8. I smiled, and it wasn't kind. I'll give you 5. That's generous, considering you gave my company 0. The sun rose over Manhattan, painting the skyscrapers gold and amber. Another day beginning. Another performance to maintain. But now I had what I needed. Now I had proof. And in 5 weeks I would have justice. The photograph was taken in 2017, at a regional logistics conference in Baltimore. I stared at it on my computer screen, downloaded from an archived industry newsletter. There, standing in the back row of a group photo, was a younger version of Sierra Gunn, though the caption identified her as Sierra Rodriguez. She wore a business casual outfit that looked slightly too large, her smile tight and professional. Beside her stood an older man with graying hair and kind eyes, his arm around her shoulders. Richard Gunn. Her father. The caption read, Richard Gunn, CEO of Gunn Logistics, with daughter Sierra Rodriguez at the Mid-Atlantic Supply Chain Summit. I zoomed in on their faces. Father and daughter. Pride and promise. A family business built over decades, representing everything he'd worked for, everything he hoped to pass on. 2 years later, I'd destroyed it without ever knowing his name. Marcus sat across from me in my penthouse office, his own laptop open to financial records from the Thornton manufacturing acquisition. The timeline is brutal, he said quietly. You closed the Thornton deal in March 2019. By April, Gunn Logistics had lost their primary revenue stream. They tried to pivot, took on debt to expand into new markets, bid aggressively on contracts they were underqualified for. Classic desperation moves. When did they file for bankruptcy? September 2020. 18 months of fighting. Richard Gunn liquidated his personal assets trying to save the company. His house, his retirement accounts, even his late wife's jewelry. He lost it all. Marcus pulled up another document, an obituary from a local Baltimore paper. Richard James Gunn, 67, founder and former CEO of Gunn Logistics, passed away unexpectedly on March 15, 2021. He is survived by his daughter, Sierra Rodriguez. Heart attack, Marcus said. Massive coronary. The medical examiner's report noted extreme stress as a contributing factor. I closed my eyes. In my world of quarterly earnings and market share, of strategic acquisitions and competitive advantages, I'd never stopped to count the human cost. Richard Gunn had been collateral damage in a business decision I'd made over lunch, probably while discussing something else entirely. How many employees did Gunn Logistics have? I asked. At its peak. About 240. When it folded, they still had 180 on the payroll. Most of them were Baltimore locals. Drivers, warehouse workers, dispatchers, blue-collar families depending on those paychecks. 240 lives disrupted. 180 families thrown into uncertainty. One man dead from the stress of watching everything he'd built crumble. And his daughter, carrying that weight, had walked into my office 5 years ago with a smile and a resume and a plan for revenge. She's been patient, I said quietly. 5 years of excellent performance, of gaining trust, of positioning herself perfectly. That takes discipline. That takes rage, Marcus corrected. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that calculates. I opened another file, Sierra's employment history at Crowley Dynamics. Her promotions had been merited. I hadn't given her anything she hadn't earned. She was genuinely brilliant at operations, at logistics, at understanding the complex machinery of supply chains. Her father had trained her well. And now she was using everything he'd taught her to dismantle everything I'd built. There's something else, Marcus said, his tone shifting. I found her apartment. Visited it yesterday while she was at work. I looked up sharply. You broke in. I had concerns about potential security threats to company leadership. Perfectly legitimate reason for a security chief to conduct surveillance. His expression was neutral, professional. What I found was extensive. He turned his laptop toward me. The screen showed photographs of what appeared to be a home office. One entire wall was covered with documents, photographs, news clippings, all connected by red string in the classic conspiracy theorist style. But this wasn't conspiracy theory. This was meticulous research. I could see copies of Crowley Dynamics financial reports, organizational charts with faces circled, timeline documents tracking company growth. In the center of it all was a photograph of me from some business magazine cover, with the caption, "The Disruptor," visible beneath. Someone had drawn a red X through my face. "She has files on everyone," Marcus said, clicking through more photos. "Board members, key investors, department heads. She's been mapping our entire power structure." "Looking for weaknesses," I said. "Already found them. Look at this." He showed me another section of the wall. Documents related to our company bylaws, specifically the sections on CEO incapacity and emergency succession. Key phrases were highlighted in yellow. "She knew exactly which legal mechanisms to exploit," Marcus said. The hearing loss wasn't just an opportunity. It was the specific vulnerability she'd been waiting for. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just opportunism. Sierra hadn't simply taken advantage of my staged collapse. She'd been preparing for years to exploit any weakness I showed. The deafness had just happened to be the opening she needed. "Does Robertson know?" I asked. "About her father, her motivation?" "I don't think so. I've been monitoring their communications. She's never mentioned it. To him, this is purely a business play, a chance to take control and cash out. He has no idea he's part of someone else's revenge plot." "And Stockton?" Marcus shook his head. "Stockton's barely part of the inner circle. They tell him what he needs to know to be useful, nothing more." I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Sierra Gunn was probably sitting in her apartment, staring at that wall of research, feeding the anger that had sustained her for 5 years. I understood her rage. I'd caused it, however unintentionally. But understanding didn't change what I had to do. She'd chosen to destroy rather than confront, to conspire rather than compete, to betray rather than challenge me openly. And those choices had consequences. The false information hit the market on Tuesday morning. I was in my office when the first alerts started coming through. Unusual trading activity in Crowley Dynamics stock, volume spikes, price fluctuations that suggested someone was spreading rumors. Jennifer brought me the reports, her expression grim. Through our tablet communication, she typed, "Someone leaked false numbers to 3 major investors. Claims our European deal is falling apart." I read the details. Allegedly, our European partners were backing out due to concerns about leadership stability. Allegedly, our Q2 projections were being revised downward by 30%. Allegedly, 2 major clients were considering contract cancellations. All lies. All carefully crafted to trigger panic. All bearing Robertson's fingerprints. Marcus confirmed it within the hour. The leaks came from Robertson's personal phone, routed through a VPN to make it look anonymous. But he's not as clever as he thinks. The metadata trail leads directly back to him. "Can you prove it?" "Already have. Phone records, IP logs, even a draft of the false report in his cloud storage. He wrote it himself." I sat back in my chair, genuinely impressed despite myself. Robertson was gambling big, trying to create a crisis that would justify my removal while simultaneously positioning himself as the steady hand who could calm the markets. It was bold. It was illegal. And it was exactly the kind of evidence I needed. "Let it play out," I said through Jennifer's tablet. "Let the stock drop. Let the panic build. Let him think it's working." "The board will demand answers," Marcus warned. "Let them. I'll play confused. Overwhelmed. Exactly what they expect from a disabled CEO who can't handle the pressure." Jennifer typed quickly. "This is dangerous. Real damage to the company." "Temporary damage," I typed back. "When we expose Robertson, the stock will recover. When we show the board what really happened, they'll understand. But right now, we need him to commit fully. We need him to believe he's winning." The emergency board meeting was called for Thursday afternoon. I arrived early, positioning myself in my usual seat at the head of the conference table. Through my hearing aids, I could already hear board members gathering outside, their voices tense with concern. Unprecedented volatility. Questions about leadership. Needs to address this immediately. Robertson arrived with Sierra, both of them perfectly composed, perfectly professional. They took their seats, and I watched Robertson's face carefully. He looked concerned, yes, but underneath I could see something else. Satisfaction. He thought he'd created the perfect storm. The meeting began with a presentation of the stock's performance over the past 48 hours. Down 12%. Significant investor concerns. Media speculation about company instability. Marvin, the board chair said, speaking slowly and clearly so I could read his lips. Can you explain what's happening? I paused as if struggling to understand the question fully, then typed carefully on Jennifer's tablet. I don't know. Everything was fine. European deal is solid. This doesn't make sense. Murmurs around the table. Perhaps, Robertson said gently, this is exactly the kind of crisis that illustrates why we need to reconsider our leadership structure. No disrespect to Marvin. He built something incredible here. But managing real-time market crises requires immediate communication, rapid decision-making, constant coordination. His current condition makes that challenging. Several board members nodded. I typed. What do you suggest? Temporary transfer of operational authority, Robertson said smoothly. You maintain your role as founder and chairman. But day-to-day crisis management goes to someone who can respond immediately. Someone the market will have confidence in. You. I typed. If the board agrees, yes. Just temporarily. Until the situation stabilizes. I let the silence stretch, as if I were struggling with the decision. Inside, I was counting the lies in his presentation, cataloging the manipulation, watching him build his own prison. Finally, I typed. Maybe you're right. Maybe I can't handle this anymore. The relief in the room was palpable. It's not about can't, Sierra said softly. It's about what's best for everyone, including you. The stress of this can't be good for your recovery. I nodded slowly, the picture of a defeated man accepting inevitable reality. The board voted 15 minutes later. Temporary transfer of operational authority to Calvin Robertson. Effective immediately. I would remain CEO in title, but Robertson would manage day-to-day operations. He'd just won exactly what he wanted. And I just recorded him manipulating a board meeting using false information he'd deliberately leaked to the market. Federal securities fraud. Market manipulation. Breach of fiduciary duty. Every crime documented. Every lie recorded. As the meeting adjourned, I remained seated, maintaining my contemplative, overwhelmed expression. Board members filed out, some patting my shoulder sympathetically. Robertson and Sierra left together, their body language victorious even as they kept their faces appropriately somber. Only Stockton lingered. He approached slowly, glancing toward the door to ensure we were alone. Then he pulled out his phone and typed something, showing me the screen. I need to talk to you. Privately. It's important. I looked up at him, maintaining my deaf CEO persona, and gestured to Jennifer to read the message. She typed back. When? Tonight. Your place. 9 p.m. Come alone. I nodded. Stockton looked at me for a long moment, something like guilt etched into his features. Then he left without another word. Stockton arrived at my penthouse at exactly 9 p.m., looking like a man carrying the weight of several bad decisions. Marcus was there, visible and present, because I wasn't taking chances. But I'd agreed to hear whatever Stockton had to say. When the door closed behind him, I removed my hearing aids and spoke normally for the first time in his presence. I can hear you perfectly, Stephen. I always could. He stared at me, his face going pale. The collapse was staged. To make you and Robertson and Sierra comfortable enough to show your true colors. Which you did. Extensively. Stockton sat down heavily on my couch, his hands shaking. Oh God, you heard everything. Every word. Every plan. Every betrayal. All recorded, all documented, all backed up in multiple locations. I didn't want, he stopped, swallowed hard. I never wanted to go against you. You have to believe that. Then why did you? Robertson said you were going to fire me. That you'd been looking to automate facilities management, cut costs, that I was on the chopping block. His voice cracked. I've got 2 kids in college, Marvin. I've got a mortgage, medical bills from my wife's surgery. I couldn't afford to lose this job. So you believed him without asking me? He showed me documents. Budget proposals with my department highlighted for restructuring. They looked real. They were fake, Marcus said quietly. We checked. Robertson fabricated them specifically to recruit you. Stockton put his head in his hands. I'm an idiot. You're compromised, I corrected. There's a difference. The question is what you're going to do about it now. He looked up, his eyes red. That's why I'm here. Robertson's planning something for the audit next week. He's going to alter the financials. Make it look like there have been errors under your leadership. Serious ones. Enough to justify removing you permanently and potentially bringing in regulatory scrutiny. Fraud, Marcus said. Yes. And he's going to frame it so it looks like the errors happened before he took over operational authority. Like you've been making mistakes and hiding them. Stockton pulled out his phone. I have emails. Documents. Proof of what he's planning. I'll testify. I'll tell the board everything. Just, please. My family. My kids. I looked at Marcus, who nodded slightly. Stockton's cooperation could be valuable. More than that, his testimony would corroborate everything we'd recorded. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to continue playing along with Robertson. You're going to act like nothing's changed. And you're going to document everything he asks you to do. Every falsified record, every altered document, every instruction he gives. Can you do that? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because if you warn him, if you give him any indication that I know what's happening, the deal's off. You'll go down with him. I understand. I studied him for a long moment. He looked genuinely remorseful, genuinely frightened. Whether that translated to genuine loyalty remained to be seen. But I'd built an empire by taking calculated risks. Go home, Stephen. Be with your family. And start documenting everything. After he left, Marcus and I stood in silence for several minutes. Do you trust him? Marcus finally asked. No. But I don't need to trust him. I just need him to be more afraid of me than he is of Robertson. And if he warns them, then we move up our timeline. But I don't think he will. Robertson used his fear against him once. He won't make the mistake of trusting Robertson with his future again. I walked to the window, looking at my reflection in the dark glass. Behind me, the city glittered like a promise or a threat. Somewhere out there, Sierra Gunn was staring at her wall of revenge plans, believing she was finally winning. Somewhere out there, Calvin Robertson was celebrating his new authority, believing he'd outmaneuvered everyone. And somewhere out there, Stephen Stockton was driving home to his family, believing he'd just made the right choice. Only one of them was correct. I touched the glass, my reflection staring back at me. A man pretending to be deaf, pretending to be defeated, pretending to be diminished. A man who heard everything. A man who was about to remind them all what real power looked like. They think they're stealing my company, I whispered to my reflection. My voice barely audible even to myself. They're giving me the reason to end theirs. April 16th, 2025. 3 weeks since the collapse. 4 weeks until D-Day. I called the meeting myself, or rather, Jennifer sent the calendar invitation on my behalf. Informal executive briefing to discuss operational transition and Q2 priorities. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would raise alarms. Just another meeting in a building full of meetings. Except this one would be different. This one would be the moment where suspicion crystallized into certainty, where instinct became evidence, where the people I'd trusted would finally reveal themselves completely. I arrived at conference room B 15 minutes early. The space was smaller than the main boardroom, more intimate, designed for working sessions rather than formal presentations. A rectangular table, 8 leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Madison Avenue, and, invisible in the ceiling vent, a microphone that would capture every word. I took my seat at the head of the table and waited. Marcus had upgraded the hearing aids one final time. These weren't just recording devices anymore. They were broadcasting live to 3 separate servers, creating redundant backups in real time. Even if someone discovered the surveillance and destroyed every physical device in the building, the audio would already be preserved, encrypted, untouchable. Jennifer arrived next, taking her usual position at my right hand, tablet ready. She caught my eye briefly. A moment of silent communication. "Are you ready for this?" I was. Robertson came in third, his suit immaculate, his confidence radiating like cologne. He'd been acting CEO for less than a week, but he'd already moved into the role like he was born to it. New business cards. New signature block on his emails. New authority in his voice when he spoke to department heads. He thought he'd won. Sierra followed, her professional armor perfectly in place. Tailored blazer, subtle jewelry, hair pulled back in the severe style she favored. She smiled at me as she sat down, and I saw nothing in that smile but calculated performance. 5 years of practice had made her perfect at hiding rage beneath charm. Stockton was last, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt that was slightly wrinkled. He took the seat farthest from me, his eyes darting between Robertson and the door, like a man mentally calculating escape routes. Since our conversation 3 nights ago, he'd been feeding Marcus documentation of everything Robertson asked him to do. Altered maintenance logs that would support a narrative of facility neglect under my leadership. Backdated safety reports that would suggest I'd been ignoring critical issues. A paper trail of manufactured incompetence. All of it documented. All of it now evidence. "Thanks for joining," Robertson said, even though I'd called the meeting. He spoke in that exaggerated way people use around the deaf, slow, over-enunciated, as if volume and clarity were the same thing. "We wanted to update you on how things are progressing with the operational transition." I nodded, my expression open and trusting. "First, the good news," Sierra said, pulling up a presentation on her tablet. "The European partnership is back on track. We managed to calm investor concerns, stabilize the stock price, restore confidence in our leadership structure. After you and Robertson created the crisis in the first place, I thought, maintaining my pleasant expression. The challenging news," Robertson continued, "is that the audit scheduled for next month is probably going to reveal some irregularities. Nothing catastrophic but concerning. Issues that may have developed over the past year when, frankly, you were under too much stress to catch everything." He paused, watching my face. I furrowed my brow, typed on Jennifer's tablet. "What kind of irregularities?" "Financial reporting delays. Miscategorized expenses. Some facility maintenance issues that weren't properly documented." Robertson's voice was smooth, sympathetic. Again, nothing that suggests intentional wrongdoing. Just the kind of errors that accumulate when someone's dealing with the kind of pressure you were under before the collapse. Setting up the narrative, I thought. Making sure the board sees me as incompetent before they see the fabricated evidence. "We're going to manage it carefully," Sierra added. "Position it as a reason why the leadership transition was necessary, why having fresh eyes on operations was important. You won't be blamed personally. We'll frame it as system failures that happened during a difficult period." How generous of you to destroy my reputation while pretending to protect me. I typed. "I trust you to handle it." The relief on their faces was palpable. "There's one more thing," Robertson said, and his tone shifted. Still professional, but with an edge of something else beneath it. "We need to discuss long-term succession planning. Not immediately, but eventually. The board is going to want a formal plan for permanent leadership transition." There it is, I thought. The real agenda. I kept my expression neutral, typed. "What timeline?" 6 months, maybe a year, Sierra said. "Long enough for you to recover as much as you're going to recover. Long enough for the market to adjust to the new structure. Then a dignified transition where you move to chairman emeritus, maintain your equity and board seat, but hand over operational control permanently. It's the right thing for everyone, Robertson added. You get to preserve your legacy without the stress of daily operations. The company gets stable leadership. The board gets clarity about the future. And you too get to split my empire while I watch from the sidelines. I pretended to consider this, let the silence stretch. Through the hearing aids, I could hear the ambient sounds of the building. Distant conversations, elevator bells, the hum of ventilation. All the background noise of a world going about its business, unaware that in this small room, a coup was reaching its final stages. Finally, I nodded and typed. Let's discuss it more later. Need time to think. Of course, Robertson said. No rush. We just wanted you to know where things are heading. Stockton, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. Maybe we should give Marvin more time before we start planning permanent transitions. He might recover. Stephen, Sierra interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut. We've been over this. The medical consensus is clear. This isn't temporary. I just think. You think too much, Robertson said, and this time there was no humor in his voice. Just cold dismissal. That's always been your problem. Overthinking instead of accepting reality. Stockton's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Updates on projects, discussion of client accounts, routine business matters. But the real business had already been conducted. The real revelation had already occurred. They weren't just planning to push me out. They were planning to rewrite history, manufacture evidence of my incompetence, destroy my reputation as thoroughly as they destroyed my authority. And they were doing it to my face, speaking freely because they thought I couldn't hear them. As the meeting concluded, people began gathering their materials, preparing to leave. I maintained my contemplative expression, my posture suggesting a man overwhelmed by information he could barely process. Robertson stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Oh, one more thing, he said casually, as if the thought had just occurred to him. At least now he can't hear how badly we're doing with the Henderson account. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then Sierra laughed. Not politely, not professionally, but genuinely. Maybe it's time someone else listens for him. Someone who can actually respond to client concerns in real time. Robertson grinned. God, remember when he used to handle negotiations himself? 3-hour conference calls, back and forth until everyone agreed. Now he just sits there nodding like a broken toy. A very expensive broken toy, Sierra said, and there was venom beneath her humor now, costing us millions in delayed decisions and missed opportunities. Stockton's face had gone pale. His eyes darted to me, then quickly away. He'd realized in that moment exactly what kind of people he'd allied himself with. He'd realized too late that cruelty was the point, not a byproduct. I didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't give them anything. I just sat there, hands folded calmly on the table, my expression unchanged, my hearing aids recording every syllable. Robertson walked past me on his way out, patting my shoulder with what might have looked like sympathy from a distance but felt like ownership up close. We've got this, Marvin. Just focus on getting better. Sierra followed, pausing at the door to look back at me with something that might have been pity if I didn't know it was satisfaction. Take care of yourself. Stockton left without looking at me at all. When the room was empty except for Jennifer and Marcus, who'd been monitoring from the hallway, I finally moved. I removed the hearing aids carefully, set them on the table like the weapons they were. Did we get it? I asked quietly. Marcus nodded, holding up his tablet. The waveforms were already displayed, showing the audio capture from multiple sources. Every word. Clean recording, perfect quality. No gaps, no static. It's admissible. The Henderson account comment? Jennifer asked. Got it, Marcus confirmed. Clear as day. At least now he can't hear how badly we're doing. That's Robertson's voice, time-stamped, verified. Along with Sierra's response about someone else listening for you. And then the broken toy exchange. I stood slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. For weeks, I'd maintained perfect control, perfect performance, perfect discipline. But in this moment, alone with the two people I trusted most, I let myself feel the full weight of the betrayal. Not the business betrayal. I'd expected that, planned for it, weaponized it. The casual cruelty. The mockery. The enjoyment they took in discussing my supposed disability while I sat helpless before them. That cut deeper than I'd anticipated. They're not just taking your company, Jennifer said softly. They're enjoying it. Sierra is, I said. This is personal for her. But Robertson. I looked at the empty chair where he'd sat. Robertson just sees it as winning. As being smarter than everyone else. He's not motivated by revenge. He's motivated by ego. Which makes him sloppier, Marcus said. Ego makes people overconfident. Makes them believe they're untouchable. I walked to the window, looking down at the street below. People moving through their lives, unaware of the small wars being fought in conference rooms above them. Unaware that empires rose and fell while they bought coffee and hailed taxis. How long until we're ready? I asked. The evidence package is substantial, Marcus said. Between the recordings, Stockton's documentation, the false market information, the fabricated audit materials. We have everything we need for federal charges. Securities fraud, market manipulation, conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. Plus the civil case, Jennifer added. Wrongful termination preparation, breach of contract, defamation. The board will have no choice but to act. Timeline. We could move tomorrow, Marcus said. But, if we wait another few weeks, let them commit further. Let Robertson implement his falsified audit findings. Let Sierra continue her pattern of evidence. We'd have an even stronger case. I considered this, watching my reflection in the window glass. The same reflection I'd spoken to weeks ago, making promises about ending their conspiracy. No, I said finally. We've waited long enough. They've revealed themselves. They've committed crimes. They've given us everything we need. I turned back to face Marcus and Jennifer. 60 days, I said. That's what I'm giving them. 60 days from today until D-Day. Long enough for them to feel completely secure. Long enough for them to make their final moves. But not long enough for them to do irreparable damage. June 15th, Marcus calculated. That puts us right before the board's summer meeting. Perfect timing for maximum visibility. Contact Lawrence, I said, referring to my attorney. Tell him to prepare the boardroom presentation. I want every piece of evidence compiled, organized, ready to present. I want witness statements from Stockton. I want financial analysis showing the damage Robertson's false leaks caused. I want documentation of every fabricated record, every altered document, every lie. Jennifer was already typing notes. What about the hearing aids? Do we reveal that the deafness was fake? I thought about this carefully. The fake disability was arguably a deception, something opposing counsel could use to paint me as manipulative. But it was also the key that had unlocked all their secrets. We reveal everything, I said. The staged collapse, the fake hearing loss, the surveillance. All of it. Because the truth is simple. I had credible evidence of a conspiracy and I used legal means to gather proof. They're the ones who committed crimes. I'm the one who documented them. The board might not like the deception, Jennifer warned. The board is going to like securities fraud and market manipulation even less, I replied. They're going to be furious when they realize Robertson manufactured a crisis that cost shareholders hundreds of millions in market value. They're going to demand accountability. I picked up the hearing aids from the table, turned them over in my hand. Such small devices. Such immense power. Prepare the legal team, I said. Prepare the evidence package. Prepare the board presentation. I looked at Marcus. And prepare security protocols for June 15th. When we drop this bomb, Robertson and Sierra are going to react. I want everything locked down. Company accounts, facility access, digital systems. The moment we present the evidence, they're contained. Already working on it, Marcus said. I composed a message on my phone, short, encrypted, sent through channels that couldn't be intercepted. To Lawrence Chen, senior partner, Chen and Associates. Prepare the boardroom. D-Day in 60 days. Evidence package to follow. This ends June 15th. I hit send. The reply came within seconds. Understood. We'll be ready. They won't know what hit them. I stood in that conference room, the afternoon sun streaming through windows, and felt something shift inside me. For weeks, I'd been playing defense, gathering evidence, building cases, protecting what was mine. Now, finally, I was going on offense. The betrayal was no longer rumor. It wasn't suspicion or instinct or careful deduction. It was proof. Recorded, documented, undeniable proof. And in 60 days, I would use that proof to destroy everyone who'd tried to destroy me. Not with anger. Not with emotion. With evidence. With law. With the cold, precise application of consequences they'd spent 5 years earning. They think they've won, I said quietly, speaking more to myself than to Marcus and Jennifer. They think the hard part is over, that they've successfully executed a coup, that they're just managing the transition now. I smiled, and it wasn't kind. They have no idea that every word they've spoken, every plan they've made, every crime they've committed, I've heard it all, recorded it all, preserved it all. I put the hearing aids back in my ears, resumed my performance, became once again the diminished CEO who couldn't hear the world around him. But inside I was sharper than ever. Inside I was counting down. 60 days until they learned that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And the deaf man they'd mocked was about to become the loudest voice in the room. May 2025. 35 days until D-Day. The board meeting invitation arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, marked urgent and confidential. Special session. Leadership Review and Corporate Governance Assessment. May 20th. 2 p.m. Attendance mandatory. I read it 3 times, sitting in my penthouse with cold coffee and the early morning light painting Manhattan gold. Jennifer had forwarded it to me immediately, along with a brief message. They're moving faster than expected. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, his expression grim. It's not just a review, he said, pulling up documents on his tablet. I intercepted the background materials Robertson sent to board members yesterday. He's framing this as a governance crisis that requires immediate intervention. He showed me the memo. It was masterfully written. No direct attacks on me, nothing that could be construed as hostile. Just careful language about concerning patterns, communication challenges, operational inefficiencies, and fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Every sentence designed to build a case for my permanent removal. He's attached the falsified audit findings, Marcus continued, swiping through pages. The manufactured maintenance reports. Financial discrepancies that don't actually exist. He's built an entire narrative of incompetence. How many board members has he lobbied directly? At least 7. Maybe 9. He's been working them individually. Dinners, golf outings, private calls. Sierra's been handling the institutional investors, reassuring them that stable leadership is coming. I set down my coffee, no longer interested in pretending to drink it. Show me the vote count. Marcus pulled up a spreadsheet tracking board member positions. Red for Robertson's confirmed supporters. Green for those likely to support me. Yellow for uncertain. Too much red. Not enough green. If the vote happened today, Marcus said quietly, you'd lose. 12-8. Maybe 13-7. They have the numbers to remove you as CEO and install Robertson permanently. I studied the names in red. People I'd worked with for years. People who'd praised my vision, celebrated our successes, benefited enormously from our growth. People who were now ready to push me aside based on fabricated evidence and a disability they thought was real. What about the uncertain votes? I asked, pointing to the yellow names. Could go either way. They're uncomfortable with the speed of this, but Robertson's been effective at framing it as urgency rather than opportunism. We can't wait for a recovery that might never come. The market won't tolerate extended uncertainty. That kind of messaging. I walked to the window, watching the city wake up below. Somewhere down there, Robertson was probably having a victory breakfast. Sierra was probably reviewing her plans. And Stockton was probably losing sleep over the choice he'd made. We need to accelerate, I said. Move D-Day up. To when? The leadership review meeting. May 20th. That's when we present everything. Marcus hesitated. That's only 2 weeks away. We'd planned for June 15th. More time to gather evidence, build the case. They're not giving us more time, I interrupted. If we wait until June, I might not have a company left to save. They're moving now. We move now. The legal team. We'll work faster. Call Lawrence. Tell him the timeline just compressed. Tell him we present in 14 days, and it needs to be airtight. Marcus nodded slowly. It's risky. If we're missing anything, if there's a gap in the evidence. There won't be. We have recordings. We have Stockton's testimony. We have documentation of securities fraud and market manipulation. We have everything we need. I turned back from the window, and Marcus must have seen something in my expression because he didn't argue further. 14 days, he said. May 20th. We'll be ready. May 8th. 27 days until D-Day. The surveillance feed from Sierra's apartment showed her meeting with someone I didn't recognize. A man in his late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of refined appearance that suggested old money and older connections. Marcus had identified him within the hour. Charles Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industrial Solutions, one of our primary competitors in the logistics sector. They've met 3 times in the past week, Marcus said, showing me time-stamped footage. Always at her apartment, always evening hours, always taking extensive countermeasures against surveillance. Not extensive enough, I observed. The audio quality isn't perfect. They're careful about phones and electronics. But we got enough. He played a recording. The voice is slightly muffled but intelligible. Sierra. Timeline is accelerating. The board review is May 20th. After that, Robertson will have full authority. Whitmore. And you're certain you can deliver the patents? Sierra. I've been mapping our IP portfolio for 2 years. I know exactly which patents are valuable, which are defensible, which are vulnerable to challenge. Once Robertson installs me as CEO. Whitmore. Once you install yourself as COO. Brief pause. Sierra. Once I'm COO, I'll have direct access to R&D documentation, patent filings, proprietary processes. Everything you need to replicate our logistics algorithm. Whitmore. And the price? Sierra. $50 million. 20 up front. 30 on delivery. Plus a consulting contract for me. 5 years, 8 figures, your choice of title. Whitmore. You realize you're describing corporate espionage. Patent theft. If this becomes public. Sierra. It won't. Robertson thinks he's running a simple boardroom coup. He has no idea I'm planning to strip the company's intellectual property the moment I have access. By the time anyone notices, I'll be gone. I listened to the recording 3 times, each playthrough sharpening my understanding of just how deep Sierra's betrayal ran. This wasn't just about revenge for her father anymore. This wasn't even about taking my company. This was about destroying it completely and profiting from the wreckage. She's planned this for 5 years, I said quietly. Every promotion, every project she led, every system she helped design, she was memorizing it all. Documenting it. Preparing to sell it. Industrial espionage on this scale could bring federal charges, Marcus said. FBI. Probably Department of Justice. We're talking about trade secrets worth hundreds of millions. Does Robertson know? I don't think so. In all our surveillance, there's been no indication he's aware of the Whitmore meetings. To him, this is still about becoming CEO and cashing out. He doesn't realize his co-conspirator is planning to gut the company and disappear. I felt something cold and precise settle in my chest. Sierra had transformed from sympathetic figure, daughter avenging her father, to something far more dangerous. She wasn't seeking justice. She was seeking annihilation. And she was using Robertson as cover. "Get this recording to Lawrence immediately," I said. "This changes everything. This isn't just internal corporate fraud anymore. This is theft of trade secrets, conspiracy to commit espionage, probably RICO predicates if we can prove pattern and coordination." "The board needs to see this," Marcus said. "They will. May 20th. Along with everything else. May 12th. 23 days until D-Day." Stockton came to my penthouse at midnight, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "They're planning something for the board meeting," he said without preamble, accepting the whiskey Marcus poured him. "Something beyond just the leadership review." "What kind of something?" "Robertson wants to present a comprehensive recovery plan that includes immediate restructuring. He's going to propose eliminating 3 departments, consolidating operations, cutting about 200 jobs." I felt the air leave the room. 200 people. He's framing it as necessary efficiency measures and correcting past strategic mistakes. But it's really about 2 things: showing the board he can make hard decisions you supposedly couldn't, and creating chaos that will distract from what Sierra's planning. Does he know about Sierra and Whitmore? Stockton looked genuinely confused. Who's Whitmore? So Robertson was still in the dark. Still thinking he was running the show while Sierra prepared to burn it all down. "What else?" I asked. "He wants me to present the falsified maintenance reports at the meeting. Stand up in front of the board and testify that safety issues were ignored, that facility problems were covered up, that you created an environment of negligence." "Will you do it?" Stockton's hands shook as he set down his whiskey glass. "That's why I'm here." "I can't do it, Marvin. I've been documenting everything like you asked, every falsified report, every altered record, every instruction Robertson gave me. I have a paper trail that proves everything was fabricated. But standing up at that meeting, lying to the board about you." He shook his head. "I can't, even if it costs me everything." I studied him carefully. This man who'd betrayed me out of fear, who'd chosen survival over loyalty, who'd spent weeks living with the weight of his choices. He looked broken. But maybe broken things could still be useful. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to tell Robertson you'll present those reports. You're going to act nervous and reluctant, but ultimately compliant. He needs to believe you're still under his control. But you're not actually going to present fabricated evidence," I continued. "Because on May 20th, you're going to do something much more valuable. You're going to tell the truth." Stockton stared at me. "You want me to confess? In front of the entire board. I want you to testify about how Robertson recruited you with fake documents, about how he instructed you to falsify records, about how he manufactured evidence to support a narrative of incompetence, about everything you've documented over the past month." "He'll destroy me." "He's already destroying you," I said quietly. "Every day you carry the secret, every night you don't sleep, every moment you look at your kids and know you've compromised yourself, that's destruction. This is your chance to stop being destroyed and start rebuilding." Marcus added, "We'll protect you. Legal immunity in exchange for testimony. Whistleblower protections. A position in the restructured company if you want it, or a generous severance and references if you don't. But most importantly, you get to look at yourself in the mirror again." Stockton's eyes had gone red. "Why would you help me? After what I did?" "Because you're trying to make it right," I said. "Because you came to me before it was too late. Because I believe people deserve second chances when they're willing to fight for them. Also because I needed his testimony to make the case airtight. But that didn't make the other reasons less true. What do I need to do?" Stockton asked finally. "Keep documenting. Keep pretending. And on May 20th, when they call you to present your fabricated evidence, you're going to stand up and tell the board exactly what Robertson asked you to do and why it was all lies. They'll arrest him right there. They'll arrest him, Sierra, and possibly several others who knew what was happening. The FBI will be waiting outside the boardroom. The moment you finish testifying, they'll have everything they need. Stockton picked up his whiskey and drained it in one swallow. My wife doesn't know about any of this. The conspiracy, the fake records, the choice I made. She thinks I've just been stressed about work. You should tell her, Marcus said. Before the board meeting. She deserves to know what's coming. She's going to hate me. Maybe, I said. Or maybe she's going to be proud that when you had a chance to choose differently, you took it. May 15th. 20 days until D-Day. The surveillance feeds had become my evening ritual. After maintaining my deaf CEO performance all day, after playing the role of diminished leader being quietly pushed aside, I would come home and watch the truth unfold on multiple screens. Tonight, I watched Robertson in his office at 11 p.m., on a video call with someone I recognized as a hedge fund manager who'd been shorting our stock. Robertson, the board meeting is Tuesday. After that, the transition will be formalized. I'd suggest your fund take a position before the announcement. Hedge fund manager. That's insider trading, Calvin. Robertson, laughing. That's strategic information sharing between business partners. Completely different. Insider trading. Add it to the list. On another screen, Sierra was in her apartment, on the phone with Whitmore. Sierra. 5 days. After the board meeting, I'll have access to everything. Are your people ready to receive the data transfer? Whitmore, they're ready. But Sierra, once you do this, there's no going back. Crowley Dynamics will know their IP was stolen within weeks. Sierra, I don't plan on going back. I plan on watching it burn. Her voice was cold, empty of everything except carefully nurtured rage. 5 years of hatred crystallized into this moment. I turned off the feeds and sat in darkness, looking out at the city. In 5 days I would walk into that boardroom. I would remove the hearing aids that had been my disguise and my weapon. I would speak clearly for the first time in 2 months. And I would show them all exactly what I'd heard while they thought I was deaf. Every conspiracy. Every crime. Every betrayal. All of it documented. All of it undeniable. Jennifer had finished compiling the evidence package. 847 pages of transcripts, recordings, financial analysis, testimony, and documentation. Lawrence had assembled a legal team of 12 attorneys, each one specializing in a different aspect of the case. Marcus had coordinated with federal prosecutors, who were preparing warrants and charges. Everything was ready. I picked up my phone and sent a message to the group chat with Marcus, Jennifer, and Lawrence. May 20th. 2 p.m. We end this. 3 responses came back immediately. Marcus. Ready. Jennifer. Ready. Lawrence. They won't know what hit them. I stood at the window, my reflection staring back at me. The man who'd pretended to be deaf to hear the truth, who'd played weak to expose strength, who'd let himself be mocked and diminished to build an unassailable case. The storm was gathering. Thunder on the horizon. And on May 20th it would break. Not with rage. Not with emotion. With evidence. With law. With consequences that had been 5 years in the making for Sierra, 2 months in the making for Robertson, and exactly long enough for all of them. They think they're tightening their grip, I whispered to my reflection. They don't realize they're tying their own nooses. 5 days. The countdown had become real. May 20th, 2025. D-Day. The boardroom on the 52nd floor had never felt so much like a courtroom. I arrived 30 minutes early, before any board members, before Robertson or Sierra, before the cameras that would document what was about to become the most watched corporate scandal of the year. Just me, Marcus, Jennifer, and Lawrence Chen, my attorney, setting up equipment that would change everything. Audio system is integrated, Marcus said, connecting his tablet to the room's main display screen. We have redundant backups on 3 separate servers. Even if they try to shut it down, the recordings will play. Lawrence was reviewing his notes, the evidence package organized into sections with tabs marking key moments. The FBI is in the building. 2 agents in the conference room next door, for more in the lobby, 2 outside Sierra's apartment, 2 monitoring Robertson's movements. The moment you give the signal, they move. And Stockton? I asked. He's here. He's terrified. But he's ready. Jennifer pulled up a message on her tablet. His wife knows. She came with him. She's waiting in the executive lounge. I nodded, feeling the weight of what we were about to do settle over me like armor. For 2 months I'd been playing a role. Diminished, vulnerable, deaf to the world. In less than an hour, I would shed that role completely and reveal every truth I'd gathered while they thought I couldn't hear. Board members began arriving at 1:45 p.m. I watched them through the glass walls as they gathered outside, checking phones, adjusting ties, preparing for what they thought would be a routine leadership review. Some looked uncomfortable. They knew this was happening fast, knew something felt wrong about pushing out a founder so abruptly. But Robertson had worked them expertly, building consensus through individual conversations, manufactured urgency, and fabricated evidence. They thought they were making a responsible governance decision. They were about to learn they'd been manipulated by criminals. Robertson arrived at 1:52 p.m., Sierra beside him. They moved with the synchronized confidence of people who believed they'd already won. Robertson carried a leather portfolio thick with documents, his evidence of my incompetence, his roadmap for restructuring, his vision for Crowley Dynamics under his leadership. Sierra wore a navy suit that suggested authority without aggression. Her expression was perfectly calibrated, serious but not hostile, professional but compassionate. She'd been practicing this moment for 5 years. Neither of them looked at me as they took their seats at the opposite end of the table. I sat in my usual position at the head, Jennifer beside me with her tablet, playing my faithful translator. I wore the hearing aids that had become my weapons. I maintained the expression I'd perfected, present but slightly distant, engaged but not quite comprehending the full complexity of what happened around me. For the last time, I was the deaf CEO. Stockton entered at 1:58 p.m., looking like a man walking to his own execution. His face was pale, his hands visibly shaking as he carried a folder of documents, the fake maintenance reports Robertson expected him to present. He took a seat midway down the table, not making eye contact with anyone. At exactly 2 p.m., the board chairman, Gerald Morrison, a veteran of 3 decades in corporate governance, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for attending on short notice," Morrison began. "We're here to discuss a matter of critical importance to Crowley Dynamics' future. Calvin, I believe you've prepared materials for our review." Robertson stood, commanding the room immediately. "Thank you, Gerald. Board members, what we're facing is a governance crisis that requires swift, decisive action." He activated his presentation on the main screen, the screen that Marcus had rewired 3 hours ago, though Robertson didn't know that yet. Over the past 8 weeks, since Marvin's medical crisis, we've discovered troubling patterns that suggest systematic leadership failures. I want to be clear, none of this reflects on Marvin personally. He built something extraordinary. But his condition has made it impossible for him to fulfill the requirements of his role. He clicked through slides showing declining metrics, most of them manipulated, some outright fabricated. Delayed client responses, missed opportunities, safety oversights. "The most concerning findings come from our facility management review," Robertson continued. "Stephen, could you speak to what you discovered?" All eyes turned to Stockton. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor too loudly in the suddenly quiet room. He opened his folder, his hands trembling. This was it. The moment he would either lie as Robertson expected, or tell the truth and destroy himself to save others. Stockton's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I have a statement to make." Robertson's confident expression flickered slightly. "Over the past 6 weeks," Stockton continued, his voice getting stronger, "I was asked by Calvin Robertson to falsify maintenance records to support a narrative that Marvin Crowley had been negligent in his duties." The room went completely still. I complied initially, out of fear for my job and my family. "But I've been documenting everything." He pulled papers from his folder. "These are the original, accurate maintenance reports. These are the falsified versions Robertson instructed me to create. And these are emails and recordings proving he directed this fraud." Robertson's face had gone from confident to frozen. Stephen, what the hell are you? I'm telling the truth, Stockton interrupted, his voice now steady. Something I should have done from the beginning. Morrison looked between them, his expression transforming from confusion to fury. Calvin, what is he talking about? He's clearly having some kind of breakdown, Robertson said quickly. The pressure of the audit must have. I'm not having a breakdown, Stockton said. I'm a witness. And I'm prepared to testify to federal investigators about everything that's happened here. That's when I stood. Every head in the room turned toward me. For 2 months, they'd seen me as diminished. Sitting quietly, nodding along, typing on tablets because I supposedly couldn't hear. Now I was standing, and something in my posture made them realize something fundamental had changed. I reached up and slowly, deliberately, removed the hearing aids from my ears. Set them on the table where everyone could see them. Then I spoke clearly, my voice carrying easily through the silent boardroom. You're right about one thing, Calvin. I haven't been hearing a lot lately. I paused, letting the shock register on faces around the table. I've been listening. Robertson's face drained of color. Sierra had gone absolutely still, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack at the edges. The hearing loss was fake, I continued, my voice calm but carrying the weight of 2 months of betrayal. Staged with help from my security chief after we received credible evidence of a conspiracy within my executive team. The collapse was theater. The disability was a trap. And all of you, I looked directly at Robertson and Sierra, walked right into it. That's insane, Robertson said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're claiming you faked a medical condition too. To gather evidence of crimes being committed in my own company, I interrupted. Which brings us to what you've really been doing these past 2 months. I nodded to Marcus, who pressed a button on his tablet. The main screen that Robertson had been using for his presentation flickered and changed. Audio waveforms appeared, accompanied by timestamp data and location information. Then the recordings began to play. Robertson's voice crystal clear. At least now he can't hear how badly we're doing. Sierra's voice unmistakable. Maybe it's time someone else listens for him. Robertson again. God, remember when he used to handle negotiations himself? 3-hour conference calls, back and forth until everyone agreed. Now he just sits there nodding like a broken toy. Sierra. A very expensive broken toy, costing us millions in delayed decisions and missed opportunities. Gasps filled the room. Board members looked at Robertson and Sierra with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. But we were just getting started. Marcus advanced to the next recording. Robertson on a video call with the hedge fund manager. The board meeting is Tuesday. After that, the transition will be formalized. I'd suggest your fund take a position before the announcement. That's insider trading, Calvin. That's strategic information sharing between business partners. Completely different. Morrison stood up from his chair. Jesus Christ, Calvin. Wait, I said quietly. There's more. The next recording played, Sierra with Charles Whitmore. Once I'm COO, I'll have direct access to R&D documentation, patent filings, proprietary processes, everything you need to replicate our logistics algorithm. And the price? $50 million. 20 up front, 30 on delivery. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that boardroom. Sierra had gone rigid, her face a mask that was beginning to fracture. Robertson looked like he'd been hit with a hammer. That's corporate espionage, Morrison said, his voice shaking with rage. That's theft of trade secrets. That's multiple federal crimes, Lawrence Chin said, standing and identifying himself. I'm Marvin's attorney, and I've been working with the FBI on this investigation for 6 weeks. Everything you just heard has been authenticated, time-stamped, and submitted as evidence in a criminal complaint. This is entrapment, Robertson said desperately. He faked a disability to trick us into confessing to securities fraud, market manipulation, insider trading, conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, and attempted theft of intellectual property, Lawrence finished. none of which would have happened if you hadn't chosen to commit those crimes. Mr. Crowley's investigative methods are completely legal. Your actions are not. I pressed another button. More recordings played, the board dinner at Per Se, where they'd openly discussed removing me, the manipulated investor leaks that had crashed our stock price, the fabricated audit findings, Robertson's instructions to Stockton about falsifying records. Each recording was damning. Each one added another charge to the growing list. Sierra finally moved, standing abruptly and heading for the door. I wouldn't, Marcus said calmly. FBI agents are waiting in the hallway. The moment you leave this room, you'll be detained. She froze, her hand on the door handle. Sit down, Sierra, I said quietly. You spent 5 years planning this. The least you can do is stay for the ending. She turned slowly, and for the first time I saw the mask completely fall away. What remained was raw fury, the rage of someone who'd sacrificed years to a revenge plot that had just collapsed completely. You knew, she said, her voice barely controlled. How long? Long enough. I know about your father. I know about gun logistics. I know what my acquisition cost your family. Something flickered in her expression, surprised that I'd made the connection. I'm genuinely sorry about that, I continued. It was collateral damage from a business decision I made without fully understanding the human cost. That was wrong. I should have done better due diligence. I should have considered the downstream effects. You should have cared, she spat. You should have cared that you destroyed people's lives. You're right. I should have. And I'll have to live with that failure. I paused. But your father's tragedy doesn't justify industrial espionage. It doesn't justify conspiring to steal patents and sell them to competitors. It doesn't justify trying to destroy hundreds of jobs out of personal vendetta. Don't you dare. You became exactly what you hated, I said quietly. Someone willing to destroy innocent people's livelihoods to serve your own agenda. Your father built something legitimate. You're trying to profit from corporate theft. Her hands were shaking with rage. You have no idea what you took from me. I know exactly what I took. And I know that nothing I say will make it right. But Sierra, this path you chose? It doesn't honor his memory. It destroys it. For a moment, I thought she might cry. Or scream. Or attack me physically. Instead, she laughed. Bitter, broken, empty. You still win, she said. Even knowing what you did, even after everything, you still get to walk away the hero. No, I said. I walk away a man who made mistakes and tried to do better. You walk away in federal custody. There's a difference. The door opened. 2 FBI agents entered. Badges visible. Calvin Robertson and Sierra Gunn, one of them said formally. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit securities fraud, market manipulation, insider trading, and corporate espionage. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda warnings continued as they handcuffed Robertson and Sierra. Robertson looked shell-shocked, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Sierra maintained her bitter composure, but her eyes were dead, the eyes of someone whose 5-year plan had just evaporated in an hour. As they were led from the boardroom, cameras flashing from media who'd somehow already learned what was happening, I remained standing at the head of the table. The board members sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Finally, Morrison spoke. Marvin, I don't even know what to say. Say you'll stay, I replied. All of you. The company needs stable governance now more than ever. We need to rebuild trust, repair damage, show our investors and employees and clients that we're still standing. The stock price will recover once the truth is public. Once people understand that the crisis was manufactured by criminals, not caused by actual company problems. And you? Another board member asked. What happens to you? I looked around the table at these people who'd been moments away from removing me based on lies. I stay, I said simply. I'm still CEO. I'm still founder. And I'm still committed to building this company the right way. But I'm also committed to being more careful about who I trust, more attentive to warning signs, more willing to investigate when something feels wrong. I gestured to the hearing aids still sitting on the table. These taught me something important. Sometimes you have to stop talking and start listening. Sometimes you have to make yourself vulnerable to see who's really on your side. And sometimes silence is the strongest position you can take. Morrison nodded slowly. You could have come to us earlier. Brought us the evidence instead of staging this ambush. And if I had, would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was paranoid, unstable, trying to destroy people's reputations based on suspicions? I paused. I needed proof that was undeniable. I needed them to commit crimes I could document. And yes, I needed to do it in a way that would be public enough that they couldn't hide behind lawyers and settlements. It worked, Jennifer said quietly. Every news outlet in the city is covering this. The live stream of this meeting has already been viewed 2 million times. I hadn't known we were live streaming. But of course we were. Marcus had made sure the truth would be public, indelible, permanent. Then let's use that attention, I said. Let's show the world what happens when you stand up to corruption. When you refuse to let criminals take what they didn't build. When you fight back with truth instead of retreating into silence. I looked at Stockton, who'd remained seated throughout the arrests, tears running down his face. And let's show them what redemption looks like. Stephen, you made mistakes. But when it mattered, you chose truth over self-preservation. The company owes you a debt. I don't deserve. You deserve a second chance. Everyone who's willing to fight for it does. I turned back to the board. That's the culture we're going to build here. One where speaking up is rewarded, where integrity matters more than loyalty, where people can admit mistakes and work to fix them. Morrison stood, extending his hand. Then let's get to work. I shook his hand, and one by one, the other board members followed suit. Not all of them. 2 abstained, clearly uncomfortable with the methods I'd used even if the results were justified. But the majority stood with me. The vote, when it came, was unanimous among those participating. Calvin Robertson removed from all positions effective immediately. Sierra Gunn terminated for cause. Marvin Crowley retained as CEO with full operational authority. The company was mine again. More importantly, the truth was public. As the board meeting adjourned and people filed out, discussing next steps in damage control and press statements, I remained standing at the window, looking out over Manhattan. Marcus approached quietly. You did it. We did it, I corrected. You, Jennifer, Lawrence, Stockton. This wasn't one person's victory. Still, you could have handled this quietly. Settlements, NDAs, private resolution. Instead, you chose public exposure. Because quiet settlements protect reputations, I said. They let powerful people escape consequences. I wanted everyone to see exactly what they did. I wanted it documented, permanent, undeniable. The cost is worth it. If one other person in one other company sees this and finds the courage to speak up when they notice corruption, it's worth it. If one other whistleblower realizes they're not alone, it's worth it. I turned from the window to face him. You thought silence meant weakness. That's what you told me once, right? When we first started planning this. Marcus smiled slightly. I was wrong. No, I said quietly. You were right. Silence usually does mean weakness. But strategic silence, the kind where you're listening, gathering, preparing, that's different. That's power. I picked up the hearing aids from the table, these devices that had been both my disguise and my salvation. They thought they were talking behind my back. They never realized I was standing right in front of them, hearing every word. I looked around the empty boardroom one last time. This space where empires rose and fell, where truth had finally overwhelmed deception, where consequences had caught up with those who thought they were untouchable. You thought silence meant weakness, I whispered, echoing the words I'd spoken to my reflection weeks ago. It meant patience. May 21st, 2025, 16 hours after D-Day. The video had been viewed 43 million times. I watched the counter tick upward on my laptop screen, sitting in my penthouse at 3 a.m. while Manhattan slept below. The footage was everywhere. Cable news, social media, YouTube, TikTok. Someone had clipped the best moments. Draining of color when I removed the hearing aids. Sierra frozen at the door. The recordings playing for a stunned boardroom. Billionaire CEO fakes deafness to expose corporate conspiracy. Silicon Valley-style sting operation catches executives in massive fraud. The boardroom tape. Inside the most dramatic corporate takedown of 2025. The media had turned it into spectacle. Entertainment. A real-life thriller with a satisfying villain reveal. They were missing the point entirely. This wasn't entertainment. This was 240 jobs that had been saved from Robertson's restructuring plan. This was patents worth hundreds of millions that hadn't been stolen. This was a company that wouldn't be gutted for parts and sold to the highest bidder. But nuance didn't trend. Drama did. My phone buzzed with the 700th message of the night. I ignored it, watching instead as financial analysts dissected the situation on CNBC. The question isn't whether Crowley was right to investigate the conspiracy, a Bloomberg commentator was saying. It's whether his methods, faking a disability, conducting covert surveillance of his own executives, represent the kind of leadership we want in corporate America. He caught criminals, another analyst countered. Would you prefer he'd done nothing? Let them steal the company. I'd prefer he'd used appropriate channels. Board oversight. External auditors. Legal investigations through proper procedures. Marcus appeared in the doorway, 2 coffee cups in hand. He'd been here all night, fielding calls from federal prosecutors, coordinating with our legal team, managing the security protocols we'd put in place. You should sleep, he said, handing me a cup. Should. Won't. I gestured at the screen. They're debating whether I'm a hero or a villain. You're neither. You're someone who protected what you built. Tell that to our stock price. Crowley Dynamics had opened at $127 per share yesterday morning. By close of trading today, we'd dropped to $89. 30% of our market value gone. Investors spooked by instability, by federal investigations, by uncertainty about what came next. It'll recover, Marcus said with more confidence than I felt. Maybe. Or maybe they're right to be worried. I closed the laptop. Robertson and Sierra weren't wrong about everything. I have been making this company my entire identity. I have been so focused on growth that I missed the corruption happening inside my own executive team. They exploited real weaknesses. Which you've now fixed. Have I? I stood, walking to the window. The city was dark except for scattered lights, other insomniacs, other people wrestling with consequences. I broke my own executives' trust by surveilling them. I deceived my board for 2 months. I faked a disability in a way that might make people question every deaf CEO who comes after me. The victory doesn't feel as clean as I thought it would. Marcus joined me at the window. You're experiencing what most people feel after winning a war. Relief mixed with horror at what it took to win. Poetic. True. You wanted consequences for people who committed crimes. You got them. Robertson's facing 20 years in federal prison. Sierra's looking at RICO charges. The hedge fund manager's already being investigated by the SEC. You won, Marvin. Completely. I thought about Sierra's face as the FBI led her away. That expression of bitter recognition of someone whose 5-year plan had evaporated in an hour. Did I asked quietly. Or did we just survive? The lawsuits arrived by Tuesday afternoon. Jennifer brought them to my office in a stack that would have been comedic if it weren't terrifying. Shareholder derivative suits claiming I'd damaged company value through reckless management. Employment claims from executives who'd been subjected to illegal surveillance. Privacy violations. Emotional distress. Defamation. 12 so far, Jennifer said, setting them on my desk. Legal expects at least 20 more by end of week. Robertson and Sierra. Both filing. Robertson's claiming entrapment and unlawful termination. Sierra's suing for wrongful investigation and reputational damage. She paused. Her lawyer's argument is actually sophisticated. They're claiming you manufactured the entire conspiracy narrative to justify surveillance you'd already decided to conduct. I picked up Sierra's filing, scanning the legal language. It was well crafted, mixing truth with distortion, making me sound paranoid and vindictive, making my investigation sound like a personal vendetta rather than a legitimate response to credible evidence. Can they win? I asked. No, not with the recordings we have. But they can drag it out for years, cost millions in legal fees, keep the story alive in the media. Jennifer sat down across from me. This is the strategy now. They can't beat the criminal charges, so they're trying to destroy your reputation through civil litigation. Let them try. Marvin, you look exhausted. When's the last time you slept? I don't remember. That's concerning. I set down the lawsuit and looked at her. This woman who'd stood beside me through 2 months of deception, who'd never wavered even when the plan seemed insane. Do you think I did the right thing? She considered the question carefully. I think you did the necessary thing. Whether it was right, that's going to depend on who's judging and what they value more, clean methods or clean outcomes. Very diplomatic. I'm serious. Some people will always see you as the paranoid CEO who went too far. Others will see you as the one person who had the courage to expose corruption when everyone else looked away. You can't control which narrative wins. I can try. No, she said firmly. You can't. And trying will drive you crazy. All you can control is what happens next. How you rebuild. How you lead going forward. Whether you learn from this or let it consume you. I knew she was right. But knowing and accepting were different things. Stockton came to my office at 6 p.m., when most of the building had emptied. He looked better than he had during the board meeting. Less haunted, less broken. His wife had been with him through the federal interviews, through the media scrutiny, through the inevitable questions from friends and family about how he'd gotten involved with criminals. I wanted to thank you, he said, standing awkwardly in my doorway, for giving me the chance to testify. For not destroying me when you could have. Sit down, Stephen. He did, perching nervously on the edge of the chair. You made mistakes, I said. Bad ones. You believed lies about me without checking. You participated in fraud because you were afraid. Those were choices you made. I know. But when it mattered, when you had a chance to either commit fully to Robertson's conspiracy or step back and tell the truth, you chose truth. That matters more than the mistakes. Stockton's eyes were red. My wife asked me why I didn't come to you earlier. Why I let it get so far. I didn't have a good answer. Fear is a good answer. Fear for your family, your job, your future. Robertson exploited that fear deliberately. He's done it before. I've been reading his background. Everywhere he's worked, he's identified the vulnerable people and used their weaknesses against them. That doesn't excuse what I did. No, but it explains it. And explanation matters when we're talking about whether someone deserves redemption. I leaned forward. I'm offering you a choice, Stephen. You can stay with Crowley Dynamics in your current role, with the understanding that you'll never be promoted beyond facility management. Or you can leave with 6 months severance and a neutral reference. He stared at me. You'd let me stay. I'd let you rebuild. There's a difference between someone who made mistakes out of weakness and someone who made them out of malice. You're the former. And this company needs people who've learned what it costs to compromise integrity. Why? His voice cracked. Why would you trust me after what I did? Because loyalty isn't about never failing me, I said quietly. It's about who helps rebuild after the fall. You testified against Robertson even though it meant admitting your own crimes. You documented everything even though it implicated you. You chose the hard right over the easy wrong. That's the kind of person I want working here. Stockton was crying now. Quiet tears of relief and shame and gratitude mixed together. I'll stay. And I'll spend every day proving I deserve this chance. I know you will. After he left, I sat alone in my office, watching the sun set over Manhattan. The city was indifferent to my drama, my victory, my consequences. It simply continued. Millions of lives intersecting, separating, each person carrying their own weight. I'd won the battle. But the war, the real war of rebuilding trust, restoring reputation, proving that justice mattered more than power, that war was just beginning. The message from Sierra arrived at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday night. Just a link to a private video, sent from an encrypted email address that would be untraceable within hours. The subject line read, "You wanted to hear the truth. Here it is." I watched it alone, Marcus and Jennifer already gone for the night. Sierra appeared on screen, sitting in what looked like a hotel room. Generic art, bland furniture, the kind of anonymous space you disappeared into. She looked different without her corporate armor. Smaller. Exhausted. Human. "I'm recording this before I leave," she said, her voice steady but empty. "You won't find me, so don't waste resources trying. I know how federal investigations work. I have maybe 48 hours before every border control system in the country flags my face." She paused, looking directly at the camera. "You asked me in the boardroom if destroying your company honored my father's memory. The answer is no. Of course not. But I stopped trying to honor his memory 3 years into planning this. By then, it was just about the rage. About making you hurt the way we hurt. About taking something you loved and watching you realize too late that it was gone." Her expression didn't change, but her hands were shaking slightly. "I became exactly what I hated. You were right about that. I spent 5 years transforming into someone my father wouldn't recognize, wouldn't be proud of. And for what? So I could get arrested on camera? So I could prove that revenge makes you just as monstrous as the people you're avenging." She laughed. Bitter, hollow. "The worst part is that you tried to apologize. You acknowledged what your acquisition cost us. You showed more humanity in one boardroom speech than I showed in 5 years of planning. And I couldn't hear it. Wouldn't hear it. Because if I admitted you were capable of regret, of growth, of being something other than the villain I needed you to be, then what was the point of everything I'd sacrificed?" Sierra leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I stole proprietary information. I conspired to commit federal crimes. I tried to destroy hundreds of innocent jobs to satisfy my personal vendetta. Those aren't forgivable things. But I want you to know something. You didn't just catch criminals. You caught someone who was drowning in 5 years of rage and couldn't find a way back to shore. Someone who confused justice with destruction. Someone who forgot that becoming a monster to fight monsters just means the world has more monsters." She stood, preparing to leave the frame. "My father built something legitimate. Something that employed people, served clients, contributed value. I tried to profit from theft and revenge. That's the difference between us. Between him and me. Between what you did wrong and what I did wrong." Her hand reached for the camera. "I hope your company survives this. I hope you rebuild better than before. I hope you remember this moment the next time you make an acquisition, that there are real human costs to every business decision, and maybe those costs matter more than market share." The video ended. I sat in the darkness of my office, the screen gone black, and felt something I hadn't expected. Sorrow. Not for myself. For her. For the woman who'd spent 5 years poisoning herself with rage until she couldn't remember who she'd been before. For the daughter who'd tried to avenge her father by becoming everything he'd taught her not to be. Sierra Gunn was a criminal. She'd committed serious crimes and would face serious consequences if they ever found her, which they probably would, eventually. But she was also a cautionary tale about what happened when grief metastasized into revenge. When pain transformed into rage, rage into hatred, hatred into a consuming fire that burned away everything else. I forwarded the video to Marcus with a simple message. Log this as evidence. But also, remember it. Remember that every victory has casualties. Remember that we're all capable of becoming what we hate if we're not careful. His response came immediately. Already logged. Already remembered. Get some sleep, Marvin. Tomorrow starts the real work. I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and left my office for the first time in 18 hours. The building was empty, silent, waiting. Tomorrow would bring more lawsuits, more media scrutiny, more consequences to manage. Tomorrow would be hard. But tonight, for the first time in 2 months, I would sleep without pretending to be something I wasn't. Tonight, I would close my eyes without hearing conspirators plotting in the silence. Tonight, I would rest knowing that the truth, complicated, messy, imperfect truth, was finally public. And maybe that was enough. August 15, 2025. 3 months after D-Day. The press conference announcing my resignation was standing room only. I'd chosen the same venue where I'd collapsed for months earlier. A deliberate callback that the media would interpret as poetic justice or theatrical manipulation, depending on their narrative preference. Camera flashes created a strobe effect as I approached the podium. Reporters shouted questions before I'd even begun speaking. Jennifer stood to my right, no longer my translator but my new COO. Marcus was positioned near the back, eyes scanning for threats that no longer existed but habits he couldn't break. The board sat in the front row, Morrison's expression unreadable, others looking relieved or concerned in equal measure. I adjusted the microphone and let the silence stretch. They'd learned to wait when I paused. Learned that my silences meant something now. For months ago, I stood at this podium and pretended to lose my hearing. I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room. Today, I'm standing here to announce I'm stepping down as CEO of Crowley Dynamics, effective immediately. The room erupted. Shouted questions, camera shutters, the low roar of 50 conversations starting simultaneously. I waited for it to quiet. This isn't a forced resignation. The board hasn't pushed me out. The federal investigations have cleared the company of any wrongdoing. The crimes were committed by individuals, not the institution. Our stock price has recovered to pre-scandal levels. We've retained 97% of our client base. By every measurable metric, Crowley Dynamics is thriving. I paused, scanning the sea of faces. But I've realized something important over these past months. The skills that build companies aren't always the skills that sustain them. The instincts that drive growth aren't always the instincts that maintain culture. And the person I became while fighting corruption, suspicious, isolated, willing to deceive even allies, that's not who I want to be. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. I nodded. Mr. Crowley, are you saying you regret how you handled the Robertson conspiracy? I'm saying I learned from it. I learned that trust without verification is naive. But verification without trust is tyranny. I learned that protecting what you've built sometimes requires methods you'd rather not use. And I learned that winning battles can cost you pieces of yourself you didn't know you could lose. I gestured to Jennifer. Jennifer Hayes, who many of you know as my former executive assistant, will be taking over as CEO. She's been with this company for 5 years. She understands its culture, its values, its potential. More importantly, she understands that leadership isn't about control, it's about empowerment. Jennifer stepped forward, and I saw something in her expression that made my throat tight. Pride, yes. But also concern, the look of someone who'd been asked to captain a ship through storm-damaged waters. I'm not leaving corporate life entirely, I continued. I'm launching a new venture, Crowley Insight, a cybersecurity and corporate ethics consultancy focused on helping companies identify internal fraud, protect whistleblowers, and build cultures where speaking truth doesn't mean ending careers. Another reporter. Isn't that just capitalizing on the scandal that made you famous? It's using experience to prevent others from going through what I went through, and what Robertson's victims went through, and what Sierra Gunn's family went through. I let that sink in. Every corporate scandal starts with someone noticing something wrong and deciding whether to speak up or stay silent. I want to build systems that make speaking up the easier choice. Will you be working with law enforcement? We'll be consultants, not investigators. Our role will be advising companies on best practices, conducting independent audits when requested, creating channels for anonymous reporting. Think of it as preventive medicine for corporate corruption. A familiar voice from the back. Mr. Crowley, has Sierra Gunn been apprehended? I'd known this question would come. Sierra had been gone for 93 days. Despite international warrants, despite FBI resources, despite her face being on watch lists worldwide, nothing. She'd vanished as completely as someone could in a surveillance-saturated world. "No," I said simply. "But I hope wherever she is, she's found something other than rage to sustain her. Revenge destroyed her father's legacy. I hope she finds a way to rebuild it." That sounds like sympathy for someone who tried to destroy your company. It's sympathy for someone who let grief consume them until they couldn't see any path except destruction. I'd rather she had testified, faced consequences, worked toward redemption. But understanding why someone became what they became, that's not the same as excusing what they did. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. I answered what I could, deflected what I couldn't, and maintained the careful balance between transparency and self-protection that had become second nature. When it finally ended, when the cameras stopped flashing and the reporters filed out to write their stories, I stood alone at the podium for a moment. This room where I'd staged a collapse, where I'd pretended weakness to expose strength, where everything had started. Now it was where everything transformed. The offices of Crowley Insight occupied the 15th floor of a building in Soho, deliberately modest compared to the Midtown Tower I'd left behind. We'd been operational for 6 weeks. 18 employees, most of them former FBI, SEC investigators, corporate attorneys who'd grown tired of defending the guilty. Marcus ran security and investigations. Lawrence Chen headed legal. Jennifer was technically still CEO of Crowley Dynamics but consulted on complex cases. And I built the thing I'd needed 4 months ago. A system for fighting corruption without destroying yourself in the process. Our first client was a pharmaceutical company whose CFO had noticed irregularities in clinical trial data. The CFO had come to us terrified, convinced that reporting internally would end her career, but knowing that staying silent could mean unsafe drugs reaching patients. We'd helped her document everything. Built an airtight case. Coordinated with federal regulators. The company's CEO was now facing charges. 3 executives had been fired, and the CFO had been promoted. She'd sent me a handwritten note. "You taught me that silence isn't surrender. Thank you." Our second client was a tech startup where engineers had discovered their founder was fabricating partnership announcements to inflate valuation. We'd helped them expose it before the planned IPO, saving investors millions and protecting the engineers who'd spoken up. Our third client was a nonprofit where the executive director had been embezzling donations. The whistleblower was a single mother of 3 who couldn't afford to lose her job but couldn't watch children's programs being defunded to pay for someone's vacation home. We protected her. We built the case. We made sure she kept her job and the director went to prison. Pattern after pattern. Case after case. People who'd noticed something wrong and needed someone to help them do something about it without destroying their lives in the process. This was the work that mattered. Not billion-dollar acquisitions or stock prices or board meetings. This. September 30th, 2025, evening. The documentary premiered on a major streaming platform at 8 p.m. The Deaf CEO, Corporate Espionage and the Billionaire Who Heard Everything had been in production since May, with access I'd granted to a filmmaker whose work I respected. She'd interviewed everyone: board members, employees, federal prosecutors, media analysts, even Calvin Robertson from his pretrial detention. I'd declined to watch the advanced screening. Told myself I didn't need to see my life turned into entertainment, my pain packaged into narrative beats, my methods debated by people who'd never faced what I'd faced. But tonight, alone in my penthouse with the city humming 60 floors below, I poured whiskey I wouldn't drink and turned on the television. The opening shot was security footage of my collapse. My body crumpling at the podium, people rushing forward, the moment I'd staged with such careful precision. March 15th, 2025, the narrator intoned. The day a billionaire CEO lost his hearing. Or so everyone thought. The documentary was fair, surprisingly. It showed my mistakes, the surveillance that made people uncomfortable, the deception that raised ethical questions, the methods that blurred lines between justice and revenge. But it also showed Robertson's crimes, Sierra's theft, the very real conspiracy I'd exposed. It interviewed former gun logistics employees, still bitter about losing their jobs when my acquisition destroyed their company. It interviewed Crowley Dynamics workers who'd been hours away from being terminated under Robertson's restructuring plan. Victims on all sides. No clean heroes, no pure villains. Just people making choices and living with consequences. Sierra appeared in archived footage. Her press photo from when she'd been COO, her face during the board meeting arrest, that moment of bitter laughter when I told her she'd become what she'd hated. Sierra Gunn remains at large, the narrator said. International warrants have been issued, but some investigators believe she had help disappearing. Possibly from former Gunn Logistics employees who saw her as avenging their ruined livelihoods rather than committing crimes. The screen showed her father's obituary, photos of Gunn Logistics before the bankruptcy, Richard Gunn accepting a regional business award in 2016. A family business destroyed by market forces. A daughter consumed by grief. A billionaire who never knew the human cost of his success until it nearly destroyed everything he'd built. I reached for the hearing aids on my coffee table. The ones I'd worn during those 2 months of performance. Marcus had wanted to keep them as evidence. I'd wanted to keep them as reminder. I turned them over in my hands, these small devices that had become weapons, had become symbols, had become shorthand for an entire philosophy of strategic silence. The documentary continued, interviewing cybersecurity experts about corporate surveillance, ethicists about deception in whistleblowing, legal scholars about the precedent my case might set. Then it cut to my resignation press conference. By every measurable metric, Crowley Dynamics is thriving, my voice said from the screen. But I've realized something important over these past months. The skills that build companies aren't always the skills that sustain them. The camera had caught something I hadn't noticed at the time. Jennifer's expression as I spoke. Pride mixed with sadness. The look of someone watching a mentor choose a different path. Marvin Crowley's story raises uncomfortable questions, the narrator said as the documentary moved toward its conclusion. About how far we should go to expose corruption. About whether deception can serve justice. About who gets to decide when rules can be broken in service of greater truths. But perhaps the most important question is simpler. In a system where power protects power, where speaking up means risking everything, where silence is rewarded and truth is punished, what's the cost of staying quiet? The final shot was footage of me leaving Crowley Dynamics headquarters for the last time as CEO. Walking through the lobby where I'd staged my collapse, past the security desk where Marcus had once handed me fake hearing aids, out into Manhattan sunlight. The billionaire who pretended to be deaf just to expose betrayal, the narrator said. The man who proved that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. And sometimes the people we think aren't listening are hearing everything we say. The screen faded to black. I sat in my darkened penthouse, the documentary's credits rolling silently, the city's ambient noise filtering through windows that never quite blocked out the world. After a moment, I removed the hearing aids I'd been absently holding and set them carefully on the table. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of traffic sounds 60 floors below, full of my own breathing, full of the quiet hum of a life recalibrating itself. For 2 months, I'd worn fake hearing aids and pretended the world was silent. I'd learned to read lips, to watch carefully, to observe what people revealed when they thought they couldn't be heard. But the real lesson wasn't about what I'd heard while pretending to be deaf. It was about what I'd learned from actually listening. People always mistake silence for surrender, I thought, echoing words I'd spoken months ago. They never realize it's where I plan my next move. I picked up my phone and opened the message thread with Marcus. New case came in today, his text read. Defense contractor. Whistleblower says they're falsifying safety tests on military equipment. Could be huge. Could be dangerous. You want it. I looked at the hearing aids on my table one last time. These symbols of deception and truth, of strategic silence and explosive revelation. Then I typed my response. Send me everything. Time to listen. I stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over Manhattan. The city that had watched me build an empire, fake a disability, expose a conspiracy, and rebuild myself into something different. Somewhere down there, people were making choices. Some were speaking up. Some were staying silent. Some were noticing corruption and wondering if they should say something, do something, risk something. And now, finally, I could help them. Not as a CEO protecting his kingdom. Not as a billionaire playing games with power. As someone who'd learned that the loudest weapon wasn't a raised voice. It was a carefully deployed silence that made others reveal themselves completely. I smiled faintly at my reflection in the dark glass. They'd called me paranoid for investigating my executives. They'd called me manipulative for staging the collapse. They'd called me vengeful for exposing everything publicly. They'd never understood that it wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure that the next person who noticed corruption wouldn't have to choose between their integrity and their survival. It was about proving that powerful people weren't untouchable. It was about showing that sometimes the cost of silence was higher than the cost of speaking. On the TV behind me, another news program had started. I could hear the anchor's voice discussing corporate scandals, whistleblower protections, the cultural impact of my case. Changed the conversation about corporate accountability. More companies implementing anonymous reporting systems. 3 major cases this quarter where executives cited the Crowley scandal as motivation to investigate. I didn't turn around. Didn't need to see it analyzed again, debated again, turned into content again. I just stood at my window, looking at the city that never stopped humming, and thought about the next case waiting on my desk. Another whistleblower. Another person who'd noticed something wrong and needed someone to help them make it right. Another chance to prove that silence, when used strategically, could be the loudest sound in the room. The man they'd mocked for not listening had become the one the world couldn't stop hearing. And in the space between those two truths, between perceived weakness and actual power, between staged deafness and genuine understanding, between the collapse that started everything and the rebirth that came after, I'd found something more valuable than any company valuation. Purpose. I removed my phone from my pocket and called Marcus. "Send me the contractor case files," I said when he answered. "All of them. And schedule a meeting with the whistleblower. Anonymous location. Maximum security." When? I looked at my reflection one last time. The billionaire who'd learned to weaponize silence, who'd transformed betrayal into mission, who'd discovered that sometimes you had to be willing to lose everything to protect what mattered most. "Tomorrow," I said. "We start tomorrow." Because people always mistake silence for surrender. But I'd learned the truth. Silence is where you hear everything that matters. Silence is where you plan your next move. Silence is where power waits. Patient, strategic, devastating. For exactly the right moment to speak. And when it finally speaks, the whole world listens.